The Australian suffragettes. The Australian suffragettes played a significant role in the country's history, fighting for women's right to vote and participate in the democratic process. Early beginnings. The women's suffrage movement in Australia began in the mid-19th century, with women like Caroline Chisholm and Louisa Lawson advocating for women's rights. However, it wasn't until the late 1800s that the movement gained momentum. Key figures: Vida Goldstein, 1869–1949, a pioneering suffragette, Goldstein was one of the first women to stand for Parliament in Australia. She founded the Women's Federal Political Association and was a vocal advocate for women's rights. Rose Scott, 1847–1925, a prominent suffragette and social reformer, Scott was instrumental in organising petitions and campaigns for women's suffrage in New South Wales. Catherine Helen Spence, 1825–1910, a journalist, politician, and suffragette, Spence was a key figure in the women's suffrage movement in South Australia. Major milestones. 1894, South Australia becomes the first Australian colony to grant women the right to vote and stand for Parliament. 1902, the Commonwealth of Australia passes the Electoral Act, granting women the right to vote in federal elections. 1908, the Women's Political Association is established in Melbourne, with Vida Goldstein as its president. Tactics and strategies. Australian suffragettes employed various tactics to achieve their goals, including petitions, organising petitions and collecting signatures to present to Parliament. Public meetings, holding public meetings and rallies to raise awareness and build support. Lobbying, meeting with politicians and influencers to advocate for women's suffrage. Civil disobedience, engaging in peaceful protests and acts of civil disobedience, such as refusing to pay taxes or participate in censuses. Challenges and obstacles. The Australian suffragettes faced significant challenges, including opposition from politicians. Many politicians, including some women, opposed women's suffrage, citing concerns about women's ability to participate in politics. Social norms. Women's roles were largely confined to the domestic sphere, and many people believed that women were not suited for politics. Limited resources. Suffragettes often lacked funding, resources, and access to media, making it difficult to spread their message. Legacy. The Australian suffragettes played a crucial role in achieving women's suffrage and paved the way for future generations of women in politics. Today, Australia has a strong tradition of women in leadership positions, including in Parliament, government, and other areas of public life. There were several interesting incidents and conflicts that occurred during the Australian suffragette movement. Here are a few examples. The Monster Petition, 1891. In 1891, Rose Scott and her colleagues organised a massive petition in support of women's suffrage, which was presented to the New South Wales Parliament. The petition was so large that it was dubbed the Monster Petition, and contained over 9,000 signatures. Although the petition was rejected, it helped raise awareness and galvanise public support for the cause. The Women's War, 1894. In 1894, a group of suffragettes in South Australia, led by Catherine Helen Spence, organised a series of protests and demonstrations outside the South Australian Parliament. The protests, known as the Women's War, were peaceful but vocal, with women chanting slogans and waving banners. The protests ultimately contributed to the passage of the Electoral Act, granting women the right to vote in South Australia. Vida Goldstein's arrest, 1909. In 1909, Vida Goldstein was arrested during a protest outside the Melbourne Parliament House. Goldstein and several other suffragettes had chained themselves to the Parliament gates to draw attention to their cause. Although Goldstein was released without charge, the incident sparked widespread media attention and public sympathy for the suffragettes. The Suffragette Pilgrimage, 1913. In 1913, a group of suffragettes, including Vida Goldstein and Adela Pankhurst, daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, embarked on a suffragette pilgrimage across Victoria. The pilgrimage aimed to raise awareness and gather support for women's suffrage, with the suffragettes walking over 300 miles and holding public meetings along the way. Conflict with anti-suffragists. The Australian suffragettes faced opposition from anti-suffragists, who argued that women were not suited for politics and that granting them the vote would lead to social chaos. Anti-suffragist groups, such as the Women's Anti-Suffrage League, organized counter-petitions and campaigns to oppose women's suffrage. The conflict between suffragists and anti-suffragists often played out in the media, with both sides engaging in heated debates and public disputes. International connections. The Australian suffragettes maintained close connections with international suffrage movements, particularly in the UK and the US. Many Australian suffragettes, including Vida Goldstein, travelled to these countries to attend conferences, meet with fellow suffragettes, and learn from their experiences. This international exchange helped to galvanise the Australian movement and provided valuable support and resources. These incidents and conflicts highlight the determination, creativity, and perseverance of the Australian suffragettes in their fight for women's suffrage. Thanks for watching. Please share, thumbs up and subscribe. Cheers.